Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's November 1st, 2024, and today we're going to be answering the question, what happens when your identity as a Mormon woman explodes? Your identity as a human being, as a wife, as a spouse, as a mother, as a non-student or a student. What happens when you go through a faith transition and you have to kind of reconstruct all of it, including being a mom. And we have today as our guest, we're super excited to have Fran Grover with us. Hey, Fran.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being willing to tell your story.
Oh, of course. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. Fran is currently, she's married, 3 kids, but is currently in law school. And we'll be talking about how all that happens and happened. And to help us in that journey is my amazing co-host, Margie. Hey, Margie.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, my pleasure.
All right, Fran, we always begin with an intention, why you would want to tell the story, because there'll be believers and people questioning and people who have left and a ton of non-Mormons. So why did you want to tell your story? What's your intention?
I have kind of 2 intentions. One's a little more outward facing and the other one is inward. Outwardly, I felt very validated by listening to Mormon stories and other people's stories, and I wanted to share that validation with others, especially women, especially moms. I think a faith deconstruction can uproot everything about your life, everything you think about your life, everything you think about yourself, and to validate that it's hard, but being able to make choices for yourself for the first time is amazing, even if it's when you're 30, and to start out with, wearing a tank top or trying that coffee, but also realizing that you can do so much more for your community. You can go to grad school. You can kind of change the way you identify as a mother or a spouse or a partner, and it'll be difficult and it takes time, but that you can do it and you can do hard things. And then the other one is just inward, that I am really excited to tell my story because I think sometimes people, when you leave the church, they don't really want to hear it. It's really hard to hear that you're leaving the church, and this is almost like a therapeutic event for me to be able to fully tell my story for whoever wants to hear it, and kind of just like let it go.
Yeah, that's right.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we're really excited. So let's jump in. Where does your Mormon story begin?
Well, I grew up in Utah County in Orem, so from the very beginning is where my Mormon story started. And
explain to our Never Mormon audience what the Provo Orem area is like.
Orem, especially Utah County, is Mormon country. Everyone around you is a member of the church. It is your community. It's the way that society functions there. And for me, that was great. And it wasn't very hard because so many people were members of the church that was very normal. I think Mormonism probably in general is not a normal way of being, but in Utah County it is. And so it was my people and my community.
Is it safe to say Utah County is among the most densely populated faithful Mormon population in the world, maybe other than Rexbury, Idaho?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's highest percentage of faithful Mormons in the world.
Yes.
And BYU's close by.
Yep.
So it's sort of like between Rexburg and Provo Orem, that's like Mormonism's like Saudi Arabia / holy cities kind of stuff.
Yeah. If you want to experience Mormonism and experience Mormon culture specifically, Utah County is the place to go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So you grow up so you're born in Orem?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Orem Community Hospital.
Yeah.
So I've been there for a long time.
Okay. So do you want to say anything about like your parents, like in terms of how they met or missions or temple marriage or background, or just say normal Mormon family?
Yeah, so my parents grew up in California. My dad actually baptized my mom when they were in high school. And so their relationship really began with the church. And then they eventually, when they moved to Utah, we were a very orthodox family. Scripture study at 6 a.m. and family home evenings. And so it was really the culture of my family as well, the church.
Right.
Okay. So they were temple married.
Yep.
Your dad served a mission, I'm assuming.
Yeah, in Peru.
Okay. Mom probably didn't.
Nope.
And did they go to BYU or?
I believe for a little bit, but neither graduated. My dad ended up graduating from BYU when I was, I think, a junior in high school.
So they got to career and kids pretty immediately then and weren't able to finish school at first?
Yeah. So I have 3 older brothers. I'm like right there in the middle. Yeah, they didn't finish school and they just started working and having a lot of kids and raising their family.
Okay. And you did say total kids, total children?
Total kids. I have 3 older brothers and I have technically 3 younger sisters, but we can kind of get into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So between 4 and 7, depending on the complexity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So all the scripture study, family home evening stuff growing up, anything you want to say about your Mormon childhood? Did you love it? How was it for you?
Yeah, I really loved being a member of the church. Primary and our whole community was wrapped around it. I started to become very ingrained in the church when I was about 8 years old. My family went and had a barbecue up South Fork Canyon in Provo, and there's a park called South Fork Park. And in the middle of the park, they have about a mound or a hill that runs through it. And I was sitting on that hill kind of just observing my family, and they have a little patio that's there. And my dad's the oldest of 11, so tons of cousins there, tons of aunts and uncles. And I'm sitting just observing my family, and I hear a loud pop noise. It could be fireworks, gun, don't know what it is exactly. But a tree fell and it hit another tree, and all of that crashed down on the patio of my family. And I sat on the hill and watched it all happen. There was a singles ward that was there at the park. And so all of those members ran over and they all helped. I remember them saying, 1, 2, 3, lift. And they're lifting the tree. They're trying to get people out from under. It was really chaotic. We had family that was life flighted. And we ended up being driven to my grandma's condo, all my cousins in different singles ward members' cars. So we all got divvied up a little bit, and we went and stayed at my grandma's condo. And my parents weren't there. They had been life flighted with my little sister, who was just 2 years younger than me, Molly. She was 6. And my cousin Emma was in critical condition. And my grandma was also not there. So we stayed there all night until the middle of the night when my parents walked in, and they walked in without my sister and broke the news to me and all of my siblings. I think I remember my mom saying, like, Molly's not coming home. And that was really shocking as an 8-year-old. It's interesting to have almost like a very adult experience at that age, that you have to like really grapple with life and death right then.
Right.
And it was a sister close to you.
Yeah, we shared a room together, so it was really hard for me to go through that. But we all slept at my grandma's condo, and in the morning when we drove home, the very next morning, we drove up our street, and all over our lawn, our primary president in our ward had gathered all of the kids, probably at like 7 a.m. And they all wrote memories of my sister Molly on these cute little pink pieces of paper, and they were all staked into the ground, like all around our house. And we walked in, and there were flowers everywhere. And our ward took care of us. I had a neighbor who took me to go get a dress for the funeral. It was my grandma Molly and my sister Molly had passed, and my cousin Emma is paralyzed from the waist down from that. And we were taken care of, and that was our community. And beyond that point for me as an 8-year-old, my goal was to see her again, was to see Molly again.
By living righteously. Because in Mormon theology, a kid who dies under 8, what?
Oh, yeah,
goes to the celestial kingdom.
Yeah, they're completely saved. And so a lot of that was our family would talk about how like she was meant to go to the next life to do missionary work. And she was completely saved, and we didn't have to worry about her, but we had to worry about ourselves so that we could see her again.
Oh, wow.
And just for our Never Mormons, not just saved, but exalted. So anyone who goes to heaven in Mormon heaven is saved, meaning they don't go to hell.
Yeah.
But only those who go to the celestial kingdom are exalted to become gods. So your sister was in.
Yeah.
You had to be extra righteous to become exalted like her.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah. Because as a 6-year-old, if you're under the age of 8 and you haven't been baptized, you are exalted. You're right there at the highest level. And I viewed that as a blessing, that it was like, she's good, but I have to get there. And I really latched on and loved the Mormon theology of these children are saved, because I didn't know if that was in any other religious philosophy or theology. And I found that so beautiful to be like, oh, she's taken care of, and we're so lucky for that. And that really, from an early age, like that was it. I identified very closely with the plan of salvation to make sure that our families can be together forever. And so we follow the rules. We do everything that we can to be with her again. It made it real.
Yeah, I bet. I have a question for you about, so what I'm understanding is, so your cousin ended up being paralyzed, is that right? You lost your grandmother.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
And then your sister. So do you remember feeling loss and grieving as a child, or did all of this spiritual messaging and conditioning around where your sister was and how this was all going to work, did that kind of usurp or overwrite maybe your own process of grief? What do you remember about experiencing it?
I experienced, when we first got home, I had a hard time going into my room. My sister and I shared a room, and having her just not be there was really difficult. And I used to always think, even through teen years, like, what would it be like if she was here? And what kind of experiences, like what kind of friends would I have if, especially a sister just 2 years younger than you, like they have a big impact on your life. And I viewed that through, I am going to get to have all the experiences with her that I want in the next life or in the millennium, that I'll be able to experience that. And so it really did kind of settle or like band-aid that grief. Yeah. That it was like, well, I'll get my opportunity.
Yeah.
Life's short and eternity's long, and as soon as this life's over, I'll get to know her and we'll be besties again.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is definitely the conditioning. Yeah. I'm curious, as a child, if you remember feeling any sense. I think Mormonism sometimes creates this feeling that you're protected if you do all the things. And clearly now, as a young child, you've had an experience where, an experience of life, an experience of the world and how it can interject your, and change your circumstances in a really sudden, traumatic way. Do you remember feeling a sense of fear or worry or anxiety at all as a child from that point, that you're kind of not in control actually, or that things can happen to you?
Oh yeah. I think I've seen it most as a mom, because I have realized maybe as like starting therapy that I think about death and I analyze what could happen to my kids in a way that most people don't. The death is such a reality for me that it's almost a way to prepare for that.
Yeah.
That I'm like, it does and can and will happen. And I have to figure out how to be prepared for any scenario. So I do think there's been some lasting anxiety from an experience like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
So I guess that sounds like that sealed you to Mormon theology and to Mormon obedience and to Mormon doctrine and the Mormon lifestyle. So did things proceed pretty intensely in terms of your Mormon devotion?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I think I gained some scrupulosity, so some like religious OCD to make sure I was doing everything correctly. And I felt like it was pretty easy to do as a young child. I only experienced some anxiety or feeling like I'm not doing it right as I started to become a teen. I think around 12 years old is when you have your first experience with a bishop and you go in and you have an interview to be able to start doing baptisms for the dead in the temple. And my first bishop interview, my bishop asked me if I had ever masturbated, and I didn't know what that was.
So you're alone with a grown man behind closed doors, age 12, and he's asking you that?
Yep, just a neighbor from up the street asking me that, and I was like, I don't know what that is. And he
What was that like?
I mean, it's
confusion.
uncomfortable, right? You're like, why is he asking me these questions that I don't really know? And when I said I didn't know, he explained to me what that was, that it's when you touch yourself and it feels good. And it brought on immediate anxiety that I was like, oh, I didn't even know this was something I would be faced with. And now I'm like, when is this going to show up that I'm going to have a problem with?
It's almost like he's introducing you to it.
Yeah.
Kind of grooming you to, you know, weirdly. Yeah.
And so, I mean, when you're a teenager and you go through puberty and you start to understand your body, it is instead of like having it be exploratory at all or getting to know yourself, it almost feels like you're trapped in your own body and there's certain parts of your own body that are off limits to you.
Right.
And that's scary and hard to deal with as a like 12 to 17-year-old in those times of being like, oh, I can't, like, I gotta not think about myself or touch myself in any way. And yeah, that was confusing.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did that impact you going forward, that experience, along with other normal Mormon experiences?
In high school, I had always been very boy obsessed. Like I loved boys and I like couldn't wait for my first kiss. And I ended up in high school being what I think is a pretty normal teen and making out with boys and going out and going on drives with them, things that I really enjoyed, but was also like, this is my vice in the church, that I was like, I could do everything else. I'm like, I love reading my scriptures. I love praying. I have no problems with anything, but like this sexual purity, that's my problem that I have to try to keep at bay or deal with.
So alcohol and drugs weren't a temptation?
No. And especially, I mean, that was like the safety of growing up in Orem is unless you were really actively trying to find it, it just wasn't there. It wasn't there with my friends. And we had a great time together with no alcohol. And I value that experience a lot. But yeah, it was boys. And when I was a junior in high school, my now husband, my boyfriend, who was a senior, we had a lot of, by Mormon standards, sketchy makeouts, you know, in the car. And I would always feel really guilty. And I remember being at EFY in a summer and thinking just every single message that we got that was like, if you have something you need to take care of, you need to go talk to your bishop. And so after feeling these feelings of guilt for a long time, I was like, I'm going to go take care of this. And so that was after he had graduated and he now had his mission call. And I was like, I'm going to go and talk to my bishop. So I went in and I talked to him and told him enough. And he didn't really ask a lot. I just said, we had made out. We can even call it like heavy petting because that's always open to interpretation. So I go and confess this. And he was like, I think you're okay. I think you can continue to take the sacrament. And I left that meeting feeling so good. I was like, oh, I did it. And I feel that repentance. And people always talk about you'll feel Christ's love for you when you repent. And when you're done with that process, like you will feel whole. And I really felt that. The next Sunday, I got pulled by the bishop after sacrament meeting. And he was like, hey, I want to talk to you. I go into his office and he was like, I've been thinking about this and I think I need some more information. And I don't think you should take the sacrament. I think you're going to need to wait. I think it's going to need to be about a month before you take the sacrament again. And he asked me some details at that point. Was it over or under clothing? What was the situation? How long? What's his name? And he was like, I'm going to have to call his bishop. And that terrified me.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just my repentance process anymore. And
wasn't he about to go on a mission?
Yeah. My boyfriend at the time, Brian, was about to go on a mission. And I was like, oh, if he doesn't have the right bishop that can work through him, like work through this with him, I'm screwed. This is my fault.
He could be kept from going on his mission.
Yeah.
In your mind, you were worried about that.
I was terrified.
And then it just becomes this huge public scandal.
Yep.
But even, so like that breach of calling, and didn't the bishop call his parents too?
Yeah. So he ended up calling Brian's dad, and Brian had, at least in his words, taken care of it with an earlier stake president before his mission. So thank goodness it didn't have any repercussions for him. But for me, that experience was kind of traumatizing because I think it was the first time I started to doubt my own spirituality or my own intuition, because that first bishop interview, I was like, oh, I'm made whole. I felt really good and I felt that repentance. And to be called back in and have that taken away from me, I was like,
yeah.
So I was wrong? Like those feelings that I felt weren't real, or I didn't fully repent, because I really felt like I did. And
it's like spiritual gaslighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I can see a pattern from that point on that I really leaned into making sure that I was good, like with my priesthood leaders or my ecclesiastical leaders, that I really started to doubt whether or not I had fully repented, and I needed that confirmation from them, because I was like, I clearly don't know. Oh. Even if I have those good feelings, I was wrong. So that led to me probably in any other ward past then telling bishops about any kind of situation with guys that I had.
Interesting.
Oftentimes we talk about Mormon morality, law of chastity, sexual stuff as if it's all about sexual purity. But really it's about the church shifting your sense of authority from your own intrinsic sense of authority to the church as your spiritual authority. Is that possible?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That's how this worked. It's like, no, you don't know when you're right with God. We'll tell you when you're right with God.
Right. That's right.
Yep.
And it'll be after you've done what we tell you to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that
fully
right?
dependent on the church.
Yeah.
You're where you stand with God is not determinative on like your own personal feelings. It's what they tell you it is.
Yeah. Can you explain to people what it's like in an Orem, Utah ward, to go 4 weeks as a teenager without taking the sacrament, and all your family and friends are all, sitting there and watching you in the pews when the bread
Your
and the water come
parents,
to you?
Oh yeah.
your siblings.
Yeah. It's humiliating. It is like a scarlet letter almost, just the public shaming of there is something that you did wrong. And it's so visible, especially, I mean, if you're on the end of a row and there's a young man that's passing you the sacrament and you're grabbing that and you're passing it on, that is, I mean, it feels terrible to have people see you.
And people pay attention to
Oh, yeah.
who takes it and who doesn't, right?
Yeah. Even more, I feel really terribly for young men because it keeps them from passing the sacrament, which is even more visible than me just sitting in the pews. I remember even like with my brothers, if they had any mess ups or whatever it was, people coming over, hey, can you pass the sacrament today? And they're like, no, I can't. And that shame that they feel is, it's very visible to everybody in the congregation.
Yeah, this is central to the church's control model, business model, however you want to call it, or standards or health model, like whatever your framework is. This is core secret sauce to Mormonism.
Yep.
And
Mormon church success.
And kind of coercing obedience.
Yeah.
Right. Because, and I'm curious about this, as now a teen being placed in a position where you have to explain to your parents because they're going to notice that you, right? As opposed to, you actually having that choice of what you want to share or disclose. You're coerced. You have to say something because they're going to see. Yeah.
Just feeling so much guilt all the way around where it's like if I make one teeny mistake that is contrary to what I'm being taught to do, that I'm going to have to make sure my parents know about it. Everybody in my ward is going to have some kind of idea that I've done something wrong. I have to tell my random neighbor who may also be my dentist, who's also my bishop, that I've done all these things. And it is very public.
Yeah.
That's right. And the added layer, I think, it's one thing to have parents, you being coerced into talking to your parents about something that's very private and having to disclose. It's another thing for parents to have a moment with a child privately. I think that can have vulnerability to it because it really depends on the parents, how they deal with that and what happens. Yeah. But the parents are also very concerned. Moms in particular, because they're the child rearers, they're the ones that are, their whole identities are wrapped up in the children. But now they're concerned about the ward seeing the fact that they have a child that is not taking the sacrament, right?
Yeah. Yep. That it's like a whole family view, that it's like, what is the ward going to think of us?
That's right.
If I have a child that's not taking the sacrament. And then sometimes I think it's parents sometimes don't want to deal with their kids doing things like that. It's a hard thing to talk to kids about. And so I think sometimes it's easier for parents to be like, go talk to the bishop. That's a hard conversation to have. And he's our priesthood leader. So like, go hash it out with him. I don't really need to know details.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe it would be better to have those close personal conversations with your parents
versus
instead of my neighbor.
Some rando.
Yeah,
that's right.
Some random guy that I don't know very well, who's like, the dad of some of my friends, or
He's not a mental health professional, and he's
right.
not,
That's right.
He's bishoping however he was bishoped, most likely.
Yep.
Yeah. Which would have been in the 80s, or
Yes.
70s.
Yeah.
All right. So how does that, what course does that put you on, in your high school years?
So throughout high school, I was very church focused and very focused on what my future was going to be like as a member. And I was raised very traditionally, and that was you got to get to the point that you are sealed in the temple to a spouse and you start having kids. Like that is the pinnacle of what you are going for in life. And once you've made it to that point, like you're going to be good. I also felt that because I felt like sexuality was my vice. So I was like, I just got to get married. And so that was my focus, really. I mean, I wasn't focused academically at all. And I only wanted to start going to college when I saw a bunch of my friends getting acceptances to BYU. And I did not have the GPA to go to BYU. So I was like, I'll go to BYU-Idaho. So I did my first year at BYU-Idaho. And it was just still with the intention of like, get married, just find someone to get married to. And there's no better place to find a spouse than either BYU-Idaho or BYU. So first went to BYU-Idaho, and there was a little bit of me that still wanted to get together with Brian when he was on his mission, and I knew he was going to go to BYU when he got home. So truly, he was my motivation to do well at BYU-Idaho and transfer to BYU my next year. It was
wow, that's so. It was the relationship component.
Yeah, just marriage focus.
Schooling for Brian.
Yep. Yeah. It's just like trying to get my MRS degree, truly. So I went to BYU and I ended up majoring in family studies. And
this
it
is
was
so Mormon.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It really is just
I don't mean to say that in a shaming way.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about going to BYU is I was so orthodox and so traditional that I was kind of shocked and opened my mind to critical thinking from BYU. And I took a class about studies that have been done in family relations, and one of them was that children that go to daycare don't have any better outcomes for kids that have stay-at-home parents. And I remember being in that class and being like, that doesn't make sense. Like,
wait, let me see if I understand. You're saying that kids who go to daycare have comparable outcomes,
right,
to those who were, stayed at home with their moms and didn't go to daycare.
Right.
So it didn't hurt kids to go to daycare.
Right.
They were fine.
Daycare kids were just as good as kids that had stay-at-home moms.
Yeah.
And I was like, that doesn't really line up with what God wants for me. God wants me to stay home. So it was one of those things that I was like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm still going to be a stay-at-home mom, and I still think it's better because that's what I've been taught. So that was just one thing that kind of incited me that I was like, oh, I never thought of that before.
If you're going to sacrifice your education and career, you would think it would have a better outcome for your kids.
Right.
But it didn't. Let's tease this out a bit. So if you asked a public-facing Mormon, what does the Mormon Church think about women in education? I'm sure they would say, oh, we have doctors and we have lawyers, and there are plenty of Mormon women that get their PhDs and have successful careers and are CEOs, because that's what we would want. We wouldn't want the public to think, we funnel all our women into, marriages and early marriages and early childbirth.
Yeah.
So how do you just, and I think the church in 2024 is trying to convey that message even more than 10 or 20, 30 years ago. So how would you respond to, were the pressures overt or were they just subtle? Because I think the church would publicly deny that they channel women into just early marriage and motherhood.
I think it depends on what version of the church you were raised in, or what version of the church you grew up in. And a lot of that depends on what version of the church your parents grew up in and how old were they when they were parenting you. Because I really think I grew up in the 70s, 80s version of the church, which was like, you're not going to work as a mom unless you have to.
Unless your husband leaves you or dies.
Right? Yeah. Husband leaves or dies, or you just are desperate
so it
for
would be
more
like
income.
To be prepared for an outcome that's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This messaging of like, well, it'd be great for you to get an education because if any of these really unfortunate things happen, then you can work. And so it's funny to hear now the church kind of change its tune. I mean, I think they have to. They have so many women now that are at least in some version of leadership in the church that have had careers that they can't be like, no one work.
Well, universities are like 60-40 women to men in the United States. The men are dropping out of school more and more, you know? So
women are so valuable, like in not just in education, but in careers. And I mean, for the most part, getting an education is with the intention that you're going to use what you learn to actually like contribute to the community and to earn money. But as a BYU student, for me, I'm like, that's not what it was. It was like, I just got to find a husband. And so when I got married, when I was 21, I had a few semesters left and I was like, well, we're going to have kids, right? And I'll just drop out. And thank goodness my husband was like, Fran, you're so close to graduating. Like, just finish your degree. And I think some of that from him was the perspective of his mom had gone back to school at BYU when he was in high school. And that was really hard for their family. It's a lot of work to be a student and also be a mom. I know that now. And he was like, no, you just finish.
Get it done.
And then we'll have kids. Yep. So I did finish, but I finished, I was 14 weeks pregnant when I graduated from BYU. And I was like, okay, awesome, did it, check, got my undergrad. Now I just get to be a stay-at-home mom.
But not like, what am I interested in? What passion would I love?
No.
How do I want to develop myself? Any of that.
Yeah, which is why I think that's why I graduated in family studies, because I was like, if there's any kind of educational model that's going to help me be a better mom, it's this. And so that's what I chose, and that's what I graduated in.
Yeah. Okay. So you did it. You got your eternal companion. You got married in the temple.
Yep.
You started having babies, and you got your degree. Like, what could go wrong?
Right. I mean, essentially from my Mormon perspective, I was like, that's it. I'm like, I've reached the summit and now I just got to like get through life.
Can I ask you a question about what you just mentioned? So with finishing school, do you think you would have on your own finished and graduated if your husband hadn't suggested to you to finish up?
I don't think I would have finished.
Okay.
I think again, it kind of goes back to me looking for someone else to kind of tell me what to do. Because the church always told me what to do. My bishops were telling me what to do or where I was in my repentance process. And I really made Brian do that for me earlier in our marriage. I was like, I don't make any decisions without his input, and whatever his input is usually what I did.
So one of the underlying messages that you had about yourself was that you were not trustworthy to make decisions for yourself, to outsource and to look to external.
Yeah. Whoever is like my most fourth priesthood authority, which at that point, once I got married, was my husband. I was like, yeah, whatever he wants. That's what I'm going to do.
Just to connect with you, and for those who are curious about me and Margie, like, this is one of the big regrets of our marriage, because Margie was unique. Margie's mom was a nurse because they were converts to the church, and Margie's dad was a physician. So education was really important. So Margie actually wanted to get not only a bachelor's, but a master's degree so that she could teach like English in college. But the Mormon laid really thick on me, and once I got my job offer, I'm like, all right, we're going. You're coming with me, Margie. And she's like, I haven't finished school yet. And I'm like, yeah, but I got the job. So you could finish along the way. And I really, it's one of the big regrets of my marriage. Anything you want to say about that? Other than I'm sorry, other than I forgive you.
Oh no, we've worked through, I think, all of that. But I do think, I mean, what I'm relating to you about is just how the conditioning is real and how these underlying beliefs, not just in a religion, but the stories that we create about ourselves as we live that conditioning, create a life and oftentimes create a huge disconnect from ourselves. And so whoever I was in the dating John, where I was like so strong and so like, well, I'm not going to have a lot of kids and I want a part-time job and I want to get a master's for whatever reason. The minute we started talking marriage, that conditioning like flipped and I was like on script. And I think it's just it's hard to convey the power of the beliefs that you have about yourself, the conditioning that you go through from you're young. And we were converts, so I didn't have it my first 8 years of life, but still. Yeah. And also your fear of the world sometimes, your need for stability, and sometimes how that leaves you even more vulnerable to the conditioning and beliefs, right? Yeah. So I'm just really relating to this part of your story, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Where it's hard not to just default on what the church tells you. And when you're a woman and you have priesthood authority over you, it's really hard to trust yourself. And even now, I find myself feeling like if I'm going to do something for me, I have to have a really, really good reason. Like, it can't just be that it's like, I trust what's best for me and like I know me better than anyone and I can make that choice. It's like, how can I justify this?
Yeah.
Or how can I get everybody on my team so that it's okay?
Yes. And even on some level, like prove that it's going to be beneficial to them. Like it's not enough that it is going to fill you. It's sort of like, well, it's going to be good for me, but also amazing for our kids and amazing for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But it's like
kind of like the giving tree model.
Oh, yeah.
Mormon motherhood is often the giving tree model, where the giving tree gives everything and ends up a stump, basically.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you see that it's, I mean, I see that in so many different family models in the church that it's like if there is essentially a sacrificial lamb of the family, it is 9 times out of 10, it's mom.
And we had lunch with you and your husband, who happens to be a physician in Utah County.
Yep.
And he says the data show this, that depression and anxiety and mental illness amongst Mormon women in Utah is apparently sky high. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Like way worse than the national average.
It's really interesting to have him. I mean, he's learned a lot through me and my own mental health and my journey as a mom. And so he really is able to counsel patients in an awesome way. But he sees a lot of women that still don't know how to choose things for themselves. And then they're all of a sudden here and they're stuck with a bunch of kids and they are just at the will of their husband or their kids and they lack identity. And it's excruciating to be in a place where you feel like you don't even know yourself and you are looking for every outside source to tell you who you are or validate your identity.
Yeah.
It's like the Barbie movie.
Yeah. Yes.
What am I made for? Yeah.
I have a really quick question. Circling back to you're telling us about how you viewed parts of your body, or let's just say parts of yourself, as you had to compartmentalize or kind of exile those parts, your sexuality, your desire, how did that, if it did, like, so then you're married and now you can.
Yeah.
But you lived now years of a cycle where you're likely experiencing attraction, experiencing desire. It sounds like sometimes experimenting a little bit with that. Yeah. Then you experience shame, lock that up. Now we're repenting. Do you want to say anything about what actually getting married and now having the green light on that, and how you kind of work through these parts of yourself that have been in exile that now it's like, well, come on, now we can, how that
game.
worked or did not work? Like, what was that process like?
It was weird for me. And I think even now I have some moments of, I think what they term like good girl syndrome, where it didn't, even when I got married, it didn't feel like all free game. Like it still needed to be like very appropriate and structured and like.
We're talking about sex, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like it was like, I wouldn't have even thought about like bringing any toys or any kind of like supplemental thing in our bedroom. Like it's just me and him. And
traditional.
I think one of the things I had a hard time with when we first got married was, I mean, when I was a teenager, I had like a few experiences with masturbation, right? And I like understood my body in that way. And that helped me a lot when I first got married. Especially women within the church that are not allowed to touch their body in any way. We are complicated. And I was always like, well, I shouldn't have done any of those things as a teenager. But now in my marriage, I know my body really well and I can help Brian out in understanding my body. Yeah. And I was like, but I shouldn't have done those things. And so
I'm sure glad
it's just this weird paradox. Yeah. Of like, I'm glad I did, but probably shouldn't have.
That's right. It's like the narrative that something's been taken from you or that this thing is bad that you did. Yeah. But then on the flip side, you're like, and actually, I feel like it gave me some insight that actually is very helpful right now.
Right. Yeah. But even then, in like an early Mormon marriage for me, it still wasn't about me. It was like, I now get to give my body to Brian. Like it really still didn't feel like it was my sexuality for a long time. I think even until my faith deconstruction did I realize that I was like, oh, this is for me as much as it is for Brian. And like, I need to take care of myself and not just be like, this is yours, Brian. You figure out how to take care of me.
Right.
Yeah, and also having lots of babies young isn't the best overlay for, waiting a couple decades to have sex for the first time, right?
No, yeah. Because, I mean, once you're pregnant, your body is not your own. And I get really bad, like, prenatal depression. And so not only am I carrying a child, but I hate myself when it's happening. And I've had even like suicidal ideation moments where I hate that baby inside me, and that's scary. And those feelings were really big red flags for me when I was first pregnant, because I was like, I'm supposed to love being a mom. Yes. This is what I am made for, and I'm really not happy to be pregnant. Yep. And so that started like some difficult mental health struggles that I've had to go through, because it right off the bat made me feel like almost like, what did I do? Like, I didn't know what it was going to be like to be a mom, and now I'm about to be a mom. And did I get myself into something that I didn't realize what I was getting myself into? Yeah. But I'm 23 and I'm having my first baby, and I can't do anything about it now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And your husband's in med school or going to med school.
Yeah. So when I was pregnant, when I graduated, I had a baby shower. At that point, it was in October. I was about 7 months pregnant, and there's a lady in my ward that was there, and she was like, "What are you doing? Are you just waiting for your baby? Are you working?" And I was like, "No, yeah, I'm just getting ready to have my baby." And she was like, "I work at a law firm, and we need someone to answer phones like 12-hour, just a few days a week. Like, do you want to come help us out?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, sure." And so for those couple months, I realized that I really liked law. And that, especially being so miserable, being pregnant, and finally finding something that I really enjoyed while I was pregnant, I was so happy about. And then they asked me, well, like, you can stay on for a little bit if you want to after you have your baby. And Brian was getting ready to go to med school, and he was able to watch our daughter when I had her. And so I went back, and that was strange. But I was like, I would justify it to myself. I'm only working 12 hours a week. I'm not working full time. Brian's taking care of her while I'm gone. All these justifications where it's like, this is okay. It's not what you're supposed to do. You will end up being a stay-at-home mom, but we got to get Brian through med school. So like, it's okay for now.
Yeah.
And I would justify all of it. And then
I'm just realizing, because I grew up, when Edstaff Benson gave that famous talk that a woman's place is in the home and that it's evil for women to work outside the home. Basically, those were general conference talks or BYU talks given while I was at BYU. It's like a cousin to the sexual shame thing because, again, just like you were making out and or masturbating when you shouldn't have been, but that made you feel guilty and then reinforced your commitment to the church. Now you're not supposed to be working as a mom, but you're working as a mom, but you feel shame and guilt about it. And again, it's just like keeping you on that hamster wheel of hustling for of feeling unworthy and then needing the church to make you feel whole.
Yeah.
But they create the problem that they then present themselves as the cure for.
As the solution.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to make sense of what I'm hearing.
And I always just find myself really lucky that I ended up with Brian because he's an OBGYN. He's a feminist at heart and really cares about women and always has. And so he could just see that it was good for me. And so he really encouraged it. And again, I'm like, he's my priesthood authority. Like my husband is the one that's going to give me the go ahead on things. And so when he was supportive of it and he was okay with it, I was like, oh, okay, I can do it. If he would have pushed back, I don't think I'd be here.
Yeah.
So I'm just really grateful that he could see that I needed it.
Right. Yeah.
So you have that first baby, but you're working as a legal clerk, legal aid?
Just an assistant. Okay. And we moved to Salt Lake. Brian started med school. Med school is intense and hard, but I didn't want to only live off of student loans. And so I was like, maybe I'll find like a part-time job. And I worked at a criminal defense firm up in Salt Lake, and they are like the best attorneys ever. I love them. That was a really interesting experience because when I first started working in criminal defense, I was like, this is kind of bad. Like, we're defending criminals. Like, should I feel bad about this? Especially, some of the attorneys that I worked for like have sailors' mouths or like we're either never Mormon or ex-Mormon. But when it comes to actually being Christ-like, like actual compassion and empathy for other people.
For the downtrodden, for the marginalized, right? For the,
for the people that Christ actually went for and cared for, these attorneys were them. And I was like, wow, I've never experienced like more Christ-like people, and not one of them is like uber Mormon.
Interesting.
You said a lot of ex-Mormons, right?
Yep. Yeah. Ex-Mormons, never Mormons. And it was so eye-opening because I was like, oh, members of the church are so good at taking care of their own, but these people. And one of the attorneys, when I went into my interview, I was like, why do you guys do criminal law? And she said, we are fighting for the ultimate underdog because nobody wants to fight for them. Yeah. And they are looking for some kind of compassion and empathy for people that have made terrible mistakes. And
I'm a big believer, tell me if you agree, that bad behavior, so much of it's either genetic or just bad life conditions, which includes poverty, but also abuse. Like, I wonder what percentage of criminals either have biological illnesses or have a trauma or abuse or poverty growing up, right? Oh. Is that like 90%?
Yes. Yeah. Like 100%. It's either they have some kind of trauma in their past that has gotten them here. They're either in poverty or their mental health issues. I would say 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And we actually had, when I first started working there, a trial in Utah County, and the client was spewing F words on the 911 call, and he was drinking that night, but he was innocent. And I hear the attorneys in the war room, they're talking about like, I don't know what to do about a Utah County jury. They scare the hell out of me. And
Because why?
Because it's so conservative. And for someone...
Mormons would think, oh, they're swearing, so they must be guilty.
Yep.
Right?
You must be a bad person.
Mm-hmm. And so I hear one of the attorneys say, well, you've got a girl in your office that's from Utah County. Bring her in here. And so I came in and they were like, what do you think about having this Utah County jury? And I was like, for the first time, I think this is the first time I ever had a negative thing to say about the church. And I was like, yeah, I'd be scared.
Yeah.
I would be really scared that they would hear an F word, or they would see that he was drinking or had a little bit of alcohol, and they'd be like, guilty.
Yeah.
And they had me come down and help pick a jury as just like a random legal assistant.
Wow.
And that was really, it was very eye-opening, because we did have some people where when you are handling a criminal trial, you want them to look at the evidence and only the evidence. And we had some people where we would ask them, if you have some reasonable doubt, like, what are you going to do? And we want to hear reasonable doubt, like I can't convict them. And some people would say like, I think I'd pray about it. And I was like, no, get rid of them.
Right.
No, we don't want that.
So what's interesting about that is you basically were able to take a step back from your own culture and look at it from a different lens, like more of an anthropological lens, or right?
Yes.
So
yeah, which was fascinating to see that. I was like, oh, that could be a problem for just the average person that has a criminal record that is going in front of Utah County jury. That's scary. They should be scared.
Okay.
So let me just take a step back so you mentioned that when you were pregnant, it was really difficult for you. And then kind of month 7, I think, you started working.
Yeah.
And then you continued working a little bit, right? After you had your baby. What did you notice about working versus being at home? And also the postpartum link. I think postpartum can be equally vulnerable for some women. And what did you notice after having the baby? Was that hard as well?
As far as depression goes, I think I'm super lucky in this realm, because though my depression is terrible in pregnancy, once I have my baby, I get a pretty great mood boost. So unlike some women, I love newborn stage and I love having a new baby. It's just like my sweet spot of kids. And it was validating, because I was like, oh, I really do love this kid. Yes. Like, I'm so happy to be with them.
And that's just neurochemicals.
Yeah. Yep. It's so different for every woman, and you just never know what it's going to be like. And the support that you have makes a huge difference. But I think it was really good that I was working and I had that other element of my life, because when you become a mom, sometimes that is all you are a mom, and there's nothing else about you. And being able to work a little bit gave me the element of being me. And I also just felt very validated with these attorneys, because they gave me a lot of praise and told me I was doing a good job. And that was awesome, but also shocking, because I just always thought that I just wasn't very smart. And I got through BYU, but with the C's get degrees mentality. And to have a bunch of attorneys who are pretty smart people to tell me that I'm smart and that I'm doing a good job was the first time I'm really getting that and feeling that. And it gave me a lot of confidence in myself that I otherwise just did not have.
I reduced it to neurochemicals, and I want to take that back. And maybe that is at play here. It probably is. And of course, we know postpartum depression is not something mothers choose either. But I've met so many women who, once they worked as a mom, said I'm a better mom because need that external fulfillment, creative, social connections, creative outlet, to feel good about myself. And then I bring that back to my motherhood and I'm a better mom. So how do we know that maybe you having that side job actually helped make you happier as a mom? Because I think that's true for some women. Maybe.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's very true, especially because I was in very different circumstances with each one of my kids and the birth of each of my kids. And my third was the hardest baby portion to get through. And I was doing just a little bit of work from home at the time and didn't have as much of an outlet. And that was really hard. And so having my own individual identity and something that was boosting me up had a lot to do with whether or not I liked being a mom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, too, it's really important in conversations like this to emphasize that, clearly there are people that, for economic reasons, don't get to choose, right? They have to work. And also this idea that some women really love and enjoy being home, and that's a great fit for them. So the idea here is just the connection that women deserve to have connection with themselves, know what they need, and ideally be able to truly choose according to what they need, right? And that can look like all sorts of things that are beautiful and, can work and fit and meet the needs of those they're in relationship to, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's what it comes down to, their ability to choose it. And I think sometimes we're thrown into a situation that we didn't really choose for ourselves. And for some moms, absolutely it works.
Yeah.
Right. And they love it and they thrive in that environment. But then their kids leave and then that's when it's really hard for them.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, my identity was raising my children and now I got to figure out what else I'm going to do with this portion of my life.
That's right.
But the ability to choose what you want to do, like that is the sweet spot of being able to really find a fulfilling life. And I've experimented with so many different ways of doing life, working part-time, working from home. I was teaching like just spin classes for a little bit and just having that kind of outlet. But number one, having a partner that's supportive of that can make all the difference. And I hope, and it breaks my heart for some women, that they have partners that do not support them in making their own choice. And those conversations are really hard to have, but sometimes you kind of have to force it upon them. And I think I did that with Brian a little bit, because when he first started medical school, we didn't have childcare yet. And I was like, I'm going to work part-time. And so as a first year medical student, he was watching our daughter from 8 to noon. And then he was going to class from 1 to 5 and was just having to like study on the weekends. And I kind of forced that on him. I was like, I think this is good for me. I need to work. Sorry. But he realized that I was a better partner being able to do that. And so it was hard, but he leaned into it.
Better partner and better mom, maybe?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Enjoying the time that I have with my kids and being able to spend the time with them doing what I want to do with them, getting out of the house and going and doing things. And I value so much the people that work in daycare, the people that love taking care of a 3-year-old and like teaching them their ABCs and seeing them developmentally grow and be around friends. I'm like, I love my kids, but I don't love that part of being a mom. And I love the exchange of services that I get from having my kids with people that love that.
That's right. You can play to other people's strengths and they can contribute. It's like the village. It's your village, right?
Yeah. That I'm no longer like a gatekeeping mom, that I'm the only one that needs to raise them in the way that I choose to raise them. That I'm like, I will take whatever support anyone wants to give me.
Right.
So this is shaping up as a traditional, but also a non-traditional Mormon story. Very Orem, very Utah County, very Mormon, early marriage, early childbearing, and yet you're working on the side.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're having it all. So I'm wondering what could go wrong? You have it all.
Right.
At this point in the story, I should say.
So after I had my second baby, we were still in Salt Lake. I think this is kind of the first crack in my actual like Mormon story was I started to feel like I did not want any more kids. And I always expected to have 5+. And as a very orthodox with some scrupulosity mixed into that kind of member, my first instinct with having these feelings is I am unrighteous. Like I must not be reading my scriptures enough. I must not be praying enough. I must not be attending the temple enough. Because if I was doing those things, I would want to have more kids. And I don't. And I struggled with that for a long time. And I expressed that to my husband. And again, just being the feminist that he is, he was like, your body does most of the work with having a baby. So I'm defaulting on this being your choice. Like I may want more kids, but it's up to you. And so I struggled with that for a while. I talked to my friend about it, and she had an experience. She was like, I was sitting in the celestial room the other day, and I was reading in Doctrine and Covenants. I don't remember where, but she was like, I just kind of felt like God wants us to be happy, and he wants us to use our agency. And when she told me that, in context of me not wanting more kids, the answer that I got to that was, you should go to law school. And I was like, that it was the most palpable spiritual experience, revelation of you should go to law school. And I was like, that's strange, because I was hoping I was just going to get a yes or no to having more kids. But it's like, okay, I guess I'm going to go to law school. And I told my husband that, and he was like, awesome, okay, let's plan on that. I don't know when that's going to be, because he's finishing up med school. He was applying to residencies, and in medicine, you apply to residency and you don't get to really choose where you go. They have a match process, and you just match and you go where you go. And he matched in Phoenix, Arizona. And so we were planning on moving, and I had this idea, yeah, I'll go to law school, but like, let's settle in and get to Arizona and see what happens. The nice thing about that experience was I felt more peace and more at ease. And I was like, you know what? I think I do want one more. And so
One more kid.
Yeah. And so I took a positive pregnancy test the week that we moved to Arizona. And it was 2020. We moved May of 2020. We didn't even see the house that we were renting. We just saw it over FaceTime. It was the hottest summer on record in Arizona. It was like 60 days above 116.
Wow.
All the pools are closed.
Wow, because COVID.
And I'm pregnant, and my depression is worse than it's ever been. And I was like, oh, not only am I going to not go to law school, but like I'm going to have this baby and I'm going to hate this baby. Just all those scary thoughts that like you have no control over, where it's like when I talked it out loud to someone, I was like, I feel like I hate this child inside of me and I don't know what to do about it. And it seems crazy almost, but you can feel it.
Yeah.
It's palpable.
So scary, yes.
And I was just scared. And so for that first year, everything was kind of on the back burner, and any problems I had with the church or anything that I was feeling about wanting to work, it just stopped. And I just went into survival mode.
In Mormonism, I can't imagine a taboo greater than I'm a mom and I don't like my kids, or I don't like being a mom and I don't want to be a mom to my kids.
Yep.
I think.
Yeah. It brought on so much fear for me. And I knew I had felt that in my earlier pregnancies, but not like this one. This one was really scary. And I started going to therapy and like having a lot more mental health check-ins. And thankfully, Brian was in OBGYN residency, so he was very aware of it and could help me out through it. But it was terrifying.
Because this is a known thing. This happens to a percentage of women in pregnancy much like postpartum depression or,
Yeah.
And did you experience it almost as an altered state? Like you're in an altered state while you're pregnant, having these thoughts and that are so jarring and disturbing. Mm-hmm.
I think too, being pregnant, I just always felt like I was not me and my body was not my own. Like my body is completely rejecting everything that I am or that I want to just keep this little fetus alive. And I just, felt like not me at all, that I was just a vessel at that point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that revelation you had that you should go to law school brings me back to the revelation you had with that second bishop that you were forgiven when he told you a week later you weren't forgiven. So we talked about your source of authority moving extrinsic when that you had that bishop worthiness experience.
Yeah.
So then I just wonder, at what point was there that shift back where all of a sudden you felt like you could receive revelation for you, especially with something that goes against the Mormon grain? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's such a good question, babe.
I think that it's funny because it felt like me, but who's the first person that I talked to about it? Brian. Who did I ask? Is this okay? Should I do this?
Oh.
Brian. So it was still there.
Okay.
You had it for yourself, but you also still needed the permission.
Yep. I'm like, okay, tell me, is this okay? Can we do this? Like, that's going to be hard. And I think if I got pushback, I would have been like, I was wrong. Thank goodness I landed the right guy who was like, no, yeah, absolutely. Let's figure it out. Let's do it. So then in Arizona, after I had my third, I was getting more into the swing. I think he had turned 1 and I was ready to like go to work. And so I started working as a paralegal and started studying for the LSAT while my husband's working like 60, 70 hour weeks.
Wow.
So it was chaotic. But in the desperation of that, we started to have a much more like equal partnership kind of relationship. And some of that was forced upon him a little bit, where it was like I had done his laundry for the last 7 years that we'd been married. And I was like, nah, I can't do it anymore. You're going to have to do your own laundry because I don't have the capacity anymore. And he started cleaning and doing dinners. And we started to create this really equal partnership where it was like he's picking up the things that he wants to do and I'm doing the things that I want to do. And it's very harmonious. And that's where I really started to feel a disconnect with the church.
Well, immediately when you say that, I think about the proclamation on the family that we've talked about a lot. And the proclamation on the family that's signed by the first presidency of the church says the husband's job is to protect and preside and provide. So they are in charge, they protect as the man, and then they earn the money. And then the mom's job is to nurture the kids. So in a way, y'all were violating the proclamation on the family with an equal distribution of responsibility in the home and in the workplace. You were literally, it's kind of anti-Mormon. I that's kind of a radical interpretation, but that's how it's landing with me.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. But I think I had almost like slowly eased into it from working just a little bit and working from home a little bit, that I was like, we'll just try it out. And it's not going to be our forever. We'll just test it. See how it feels with our family.
Sounds like sin to me.
Yeah. Well, it started to feel like that, where I was like, this feels really good. Like this equal partnership that we have.
Right.
And at the same time, I was like in my scriptures and reading and praying, and I felt very connected to God. And felt like I was starting to really understand what God wanted for me. And it felt like God wanted this for me. Mm-hmm. And so when I started to feel that way and I started to show up to church on Sunday, I was like, what I have in my house feels like a God-like partnership. And this is what God wants. And I am not seeing that with the way the church functions.
Yeah.
And so what I came to the conclusion of, which I think this is a little bit of my scrupulosity and my perfectionism coming in, is I was like, whether women have access to the priesthood or not, or any of those, like any way that you can argue it, if it's me and Brian and God is going to choose to speak through one of us, he's going to choose Brian every time, because that's the model of the church. So if that's the case, that means that I must be some kind of lesser being than Brian.
Right.
And I felt like in order for me to continue in the church, I have to accept that. I can't argue it away. It's not something that it just is what it is. God speaks through male prophets and apostles, and that's not me. And so I must be something less. And so going to church every Sunday became excruciatingly painful.
Right. Because symbolically, when you would go, it was like getting back on a train where your identity at the core was less.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I was not something that God wanted to speak through.
Yeah.
And I felt like he knew me. I felt so connected to God at that time, and that he valued my opinion, and that he loved me as much as he loved Brian. And it just didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I think the pivotal moment was one night I was telling Brian all these things, and he was listening, and he was like, yeah, those things don't really make sense. And I had this thought in my head that I was like, I wish Brian would just say, I just want to leave, because then I could get out and I could stop going, but I can't do it for myself. Like, I can't make that choice. So I went to bed. I didn't tell him that. And Brian woke up the next morning. He had gone on a run early, and I had like 10 text messages from him at like 5 a.m. saying stuff like, I want to hone in more to my spirituality, and I feel like I'm kind of off track. And when I read those, I took it as he wants to go all back into church, and he wants to be in it.
Yes.
And so I kind of had a panic attack a little bit, and he came home from the gym at like 5:30, and I'm in the kitchen sobbing, and he's like, what is going on? And I told him the feelings I had the night before, that I was like, I want to be done. And I wake up, I want to be done with the church. I don't want to go anymore. I can't do it. It's too painful. And I wake up to these texts that you want to be all in. And he was like, whoa, no. He was like, I want to be connected spiritually to God. He's like, I didn't mean go all in the church. He was like, but I can see that this is excruciating for you. So he's like, he, with my permission, essentially kicked me out of the church. He texted the bishop for me. He was like, you got to release Fran from Young Women's, give her some space. She's not going to go for a while. Like, she just needs the time. And he did it for me, because I couldn't do it for myself.
And this is a non-trivial shift in the traditional Mormon story. Because if you grow up in Utah County, your husband goes to med school, you start having kids, your temple marriage, and then you're in young women's, young men's, like that's mission president's wife track. That's potentially bishop track, stake president track, and even general authority track. Like, you were on the Mormon track to ultimate success.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a non-trivial thing that you do and that he does with you, because it means you're going off the golden ticket, the Mormon golden ticket. You were stepping off the golden ticket train of Mormonism, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
And I felt guilty because Brian had already been in 2 bishoprics. He had been a young men's president. And I was like, he's charismatic, and he would always introduce himself to stake presidents and stuff. And I was like, oh, he is going to be a mission president for sure. And so I felt like I was derailing that. And some of the mechanism in which I kind of told him no was I was like, I want you to keep going to church. Like, until it is your choice, like, we need to do kind of a mixed faith marriage kind of situation. You can go, I'm going to stay. He had enough respect for me to be like, this is bad for you. But he wasn't quite there where he like felt any harm or problems being in the church. And so he still continued to go for a little bit, probably like a month or so. But I think he kind of internalized the pain that I felt and saw how it would be painful.
Yeah.
That he got to a point where he was like, I don't think I can do it either.
Yeah. What's interesting I'm noticing about your relationship with Brian is that, in fact, now you have likely had a few different marriages with Brian within year one.
Yep.
Right? Because you had the traditional for a minute, right? Where things, you had experiences that were very different from your conditioning, that motherhood would feel natural, joyful, easy, all those things. And then you renegotiate as well, because that's very role. You were still kind of in role, even though you were working part-time.
Yep.
Still, then you redefine roles. So then you have the second where there's a little more equality at home. That's what I'm hearing anyway.
Yep.
But also still in the and now we've got another one where now it's a new day as you start deconstructing and moving away. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
So how many different marriages and the growth and being open to change, because this would be a very different story, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If Brian had responded differently to you in some of these situations. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like, for Brian, it was very intuitive to make these changes? Because this feels quite rare, the way he is responding. Do you feel like it was a function partly of clearly who he is, how he grew up, but also, really valuing women as an OBGYN or some of those things? Or were there some hard parts in the road where, it wasn't as easy for him, even if he was on board for your happiness, that some of that conditioning and that role kind of thing was hard for him to let go of? Was it all easy for him?
No. Brian, I think an element of him being so supportive of me and listening to me was a little bit of guilt of how hard medicine is to go through. And we already knew we were going to go through these like very drastic phases of life through undergrad. And then you do 4 years of medical school, and that could be anywhere. And then you do 4 years of residency, and that could be anywhere. And I see a lot of women in that role sometimes just wrap their identity in their spouse that's in medicine, because you just don't have a lot of choice for yourself.
Right.
And it's like you just go where they go and you do what they do. And I think me having my own things that I wanted to do and choices that I want to make took a little bit of the burden off of him, that he was like, oh, we're not doing this only for me. Like, Frances has other things going on that she's going to do for herself. And so he leaned into that feeling. But we did have really hard phases. Like his third year of medical school, we went through a really hard phase and went through couples therapy, because I started to want like more equal partnership, but he was also working like 70 hours at the time.
Right.
So he couldn't do a ton, but I want him to do something that's more family oriented and not just medical school. So there were like some really hard growing pains. But I think one thing that I can kind of attribute to the church is that Brian and I both grew up in a mentality where it was like, you do whatever you can to never get divorced, and like you are in it forever. And so Brian and I always just kept that mentality, and it was like, it doesn't matter how much we change or how things come out of left field. Like, we're sticking together and we're best friends and we're just going to figure it out. And I recently got a tattoo on my arm that is moon phases with a couple little astronauts because
Do you want to show it?
Yeah. Yes, of course. Let's see if I can get my sweater off. Let's see.
Oh, I see.
It's kind of hard to tell.
And tell us what's there.
Yeah,
So
you can describe it.
there are these two little astronauts that are just kind of floating around these like realistic moon phases. And it's just me and Brian. Like we have been through so many different phases.
Yes.
We continue to go through so many phases. And I had them in different areas because a lot of the time Brian and I have been in different phases from each other, but like we're always just there together, exploring and like doing life together. And no matter how hard it gets, and now that we have the mentality that it's like it's very likely to change again, like we will not be surprised by anything that gets changed or flipped on its head, but it's like we'll stay together, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Love it.
I think that's such a paradigm shift from Mormonism, because I think so much of Mormonism is really based on things staying the same, relationship, people staying the same, and that's holy, that actually, that consistency, that is what love is, right? We're the same. You don't change. You don't. So that alone, I feel like, is such, which it seems so obvious that would be problematic when we live in, surrounded by things that are alive, that are changing all the time. So how could we be different? But it really is true, right? So that is just such a huge paradigm shift for you both to be in this place of like, oh no, we expect change. That is what it means to be human and alive in this world, is that you do change. Yeah.
Sometimes it's that growing pain. I think what was really stark for Brian and I is when we started going through this deconstruction of faith together, the world really opened up in a lot of different ways. And we realized we had an incredible amount of choices that we didn't have before. And Brian is a student of Buddhism and Stoicism, and he really leaned into the idea of temperance, where you have balance in everything. And I started to realize, because I thought I had that within the church, but then I realized that it was always just black and white. It was like yes or no. And it's like, you don't know how much, like if alcohol is a complete yes and a complete no, you don't know temperance for it, and you don't know where your limits are and your balances are. And so Brian and I have tried really hard to just practice temperance and say, like, what are we open to doing? What are we open to trying? And like, can we find a harmonious balance where we can explore so many different facets of life that we thought were inaccessible to us, and do it in a way that it's not going to disrupt our lives, disrupt our children, and we can like make life more rich than it was before without it really causing problems.
Right. So in the chronology, I feel like we're kind of in that place where you're studying for the LSAT.
And you stopped going to church
in Arizona.
But he's still going.
That's right.
And did you consider that a loss of faith at that point? Or was it just, I still believe it, but it's just not working for me, but he's going to still go? You know, were you processing things intellectually as well as just lifestyle wise?
Yeah. So my obvious first issues with the church were social. But then once I gave myself the space, I was like, okay, I got to find out if this is all true. I'm going to test my faith in the exact same way that I tested it as a member of the church, in the opposite. Instead of testing that it's true, I'm going to test if it's not. And thankfully, and I think it is like hilariously a tender mercy that I was surrounded by a lot of people who helped me through that faith transition. The attorney that I worked for in Arizona was an ex-Mormon, and
woman or man?
Man.
Okay.
And so he would come into my office and we'd talk about our cases. And then he'd be like, okay, well, like, do you read the CS letter? How's that going? And he would coach me through these things. And then he would like drop tidbits of information for me. Have you heard of the second anointing? And I'm like, there's something else? Like, what else could there be? And so and my brother, who had left a few years before me, sent me a letter to my wife, and I started reading that. And Mormon Stories, of course, I'm listening to just one after the other, hearing people's stories, going through LDS discussions, just expediting everything and being like, I'm not going to come to a conclusion until I really know everything. And it was the perfect timing with studying the LSAT, because the LSAT is all logic.
Yeah.
And so I started to see like logical issues within the church and things that were not evidence-based, that didn't make sense. And so I was like, I'm just going to fully test it. And when I read the CES letter, when I went through everything, I just realized that I was like, oh, I don't know everything, and it's impossible to know everything, but I think there's just enough evidence that it could be made up, that some guy just could have made this all up. And if that's the case, and I don't have enough evidence to the contrary, then like I'm not going to spend my time dedicating my life to an organization that was not transparent about all of its flaws and the things that came before. And it was really important for me to go through all of that, because it really helped me completely release the church. If I think I would have gone out just for social reasons and not explored that, I would have felt a lot of guilt and shame, and I would have felt that it was still real and true. But going through all that and being able to completely just deconstruct and release it, I was able to just get to ground level. Like I felt like by the end of that, I was like, I don't know anything, and I'm going to have to start reconstructing from literally the ground.
Yeah.
Would you mind, just because there's going to be a lot of people who are either full-on Orthodox believers who have not been introduced yet to the problems with the church, or never Mormons that have no idea what you're talking about. What are the top issues that come to mind if you had to just articulate them in a list, finding out that, and add, 3 to 5 to 10 things that come to mind when I say the biggest problems you discovered were that what?
I think first and foremost, Joseph Smith was such a huge part of my testimony, and the restoration of the gospel was such a huge part. And I discovered that I knew very little of his history. One of the things that really threw me were the multiple versions of the first vision, because that was in movies. And that was, movies we watched on Sunday, and then we went to Temple Square to see. It was like, this is what happened. And to know that it was written in a bunch of different ways, and that it was written 12 years after the fact, that I was like, oh, well, that doesn't check out. That's not evidence. That's not what really happened. And I also, just being legally minded, started to discover so many different ways in which the church had covered up abuse, and that either ecclesiastical leaders taking advantage of people, or people going to the bishop telling about the ways that they had abused, and the church
Have been abused, right?
Been abused and abused. And the church not doing anything about that. And me always thinking that it was Christ-centered, that it was that the church was doing everything compassionately. And to hear that bishops are calling legal aid, essentially, to say, hey, how much trouble is the church going to be in if this comes out? Was this abuse done on church property? Was it an ecclesiastical leader that did the abuse. I'm like, those are not the questions that Christ would ask.
They're legal questions to cover your
Right?
tail,
Yeah.
right?
They're legal questions to be like, are we screwed for this? How much is the payout going to be? And I'm like, the church of Jesus Christ should not be functioning like a civil law firm, like a giant big law firm. And that, it bothered me. And hearing individual stories of people that had been failed, because I think my story as a Mormon is first world problems, right? Like not being encouraged to work and finding out you're smart at 30. Those are first world problems. But there are a lot of people
That's right.
within the church where it is fight or flight response problems. It is abuse and
Survival.
And seeing the church not come to their aid was, especially now with a criminal defense mindset of there are people that are hurting, being exposed to those real world things, and knowing that the church is behind some of those really painful instances. I was like, I'm against that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just going up, I know kind of specifically, it's the Timothy Kosnoff episode on Mormon Stories. It was sort of mid 2022 where we talk about the Boy Scouts abuse cover up. We have a whole several hours of people relating their stories of the church telling them not to go to police when they report their abuse. And then there's the Timothy Kosnoff AP story where we learned that the emergency hotline for abuse is really fielded by Kurt McConkie, the church's law firm, where it wasn't taking care of the victims. It was just managing the church's legal risks. Yeah. So it's mid 2022, I think.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And
right
we'll have
at
Julia
the time.
go ahead.
Sorry, just right. That was right at the time I was
2 years ago,
deconstructing.
basically.
And so when that article came out, I was like, oh, this is perfect timing.
Okay. And for those who are listening or watching, Julia is putting in the show notes a link to those episodes if you want to learn more. The Mormon Church might be rivaling or exceeding abuse per capita, versus the Catholic Church. Like and there's new lawsuits that have just come out in the past month or two, class action lawsuits that I haven't covered yet on Mormon Stories, but that we probably will. It may be far worse than any of us imagined, which is mind-boggling because in the Boy Scouts of America case alone, I think the church offered $250 million in a settlement to avoid additional risk. So like we're talking $1 billion settlements here because the abuse is so extensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the church having that kind of money to be able to settle those lawsuits was something I didn't know.
Yeah. $250 billion in assets, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It was just, I was like, oh, there is a whole church organization that I know nothing about.
Yeah.
And by
design, you know nothing about it, right? Because they don't want the members to know about this.
Yeah, the intention behind we're not gonna let our members know. This is not gonna be something that is over the pulpit in any way. They're just gonna keep it peaceful and claiming on being Christ-centered, but there is so much organization. And one of the things that was crazy to me too is that it's like the apostles and the first presidency, they know about all of this stuff. And I tend to think that their intentions are still good, but I wonder how jarring that must be sometimes for some that end up being a stake president and they just love the community and they love the church. And then all of a sudden they're thrown into being an apostle and they're like, whoa, this is business.
Yeah. Most of them are 70s before they're apostles. So they figured out as members of the Quorum of the 70 how much of a business it really is. Because they don't call school teachers to be 70s. They call lawyers and CEOs of businesses and, doctors, CEOs of companies, that's because it really is a business. Yeah. That's the best way to understand the Mormon Church is as a massive multinational corporation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you know the whole picture too, it makes even like general conference and stuff almost predictable. Like you know what they're going to emphasize, and the classic, people that leave the church can't leave it alone. But it's such a huge part of our lives. It was my life since I was 30. And so of course I'm going to be interested in what is going on still. And you start to realize that you're like, oh, it's very convenient for Elder Oaks to say that there are temporary commandments or temporary doctrines or whatever, that it's like, yeah, that strategically for the church, that makes sense.
Or the church doesn't apologize, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because isn't that legal advice number one? Never apologize if you want to avoid accountability.
Never apologize. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That it's like, we will do depositions and we will do this all behind closed doors and we will get a settlement and it'll all go away. But
NDAs, non-disclosure. Margie.
I was curious. So as you're describing this process of deconstruction, what time frame are we talking? How long would you say it's kind of this intense deconstruction period?
I think like my first taking a step back was in 2021. And sometimes I still consider myself now in 2024 as like
3 years in
is almost like reconstructing still, or moments where I'm still deconstructing. And a lot of the time it's because I have a certain mindset or something that pops into my head, something I think about myself that I'm like, oh, there's Mormon Fran. She's still there. Yep.
Yes, that's right. And don't you feel that once you've deconstructed one area like Mormonism, it leads almost like a domino effect to deconstructing other things in life, the educational system, the medical system, or that it kind of allows you that critical thinking.
It's marriage, it's parenthood.
We do it the rest of our lives. We're constantly
political.
If we're open to life, we're doing this dance of both deconstructing and reconstructing as we go. But I wondered, so you're kind of, in many ways, you were deconstructing marriage before you were deconstructing religion in some ways, but what did it feel like for you, this process of deconstructing? What were some of the feelings that you had? And you're also studying for the LSAT. This is a full life. You have
3 kids,
a physician husband who's is he in residency
at the time?
And then you have 3 children, studying for the LSAT, and on top of that,
part-time job.
Deconstructing
a high demand religion,
right?
basically.
Yeah. So what did you feel? What were some of the feelings you felt?
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, it was. I'm like, there are too many things going on sometimes. Sometimes the busyness was a distraction from how painful leaving the church was for me. Sometimes people don't understand how like truly traumatic it can be. And I think because I was so because I believed it so literally and with my entire soul, that it was really painful for a long time. There were a lot of tears. I would go through these roller coasters of just being livid, just so mad at the church for not telling me things and for not giving me the information so that I could make my own choices about it. And so I used my kids sometimes as a distraction. I used studying for the LSAT. Even by the time I ended up going to law school, my first year at ASU, I was still deconstructing, and I find myself sometimes just telling people too much, talking about the church too much, having it be like, I think sometimes when you leave the church, I'm like, it's half your personality. And there's like any excuse to talk to people about like Mormonism is you're just like searching for a way to just like release it, to get rid of it. Cause it was in every single facet of my life. It was the way I defined parenthood. It was the way I defined who I am as a person, how I see the world, how I see poverty, how I see just politics, everything was in. And so when the church dissipated, it was so hard to not have just like every single thing I thought about everything crumble. And I went through these moments of being like, I don't know anything. I feel like I'm a baby and I'm 30, that I'm like, I've never made a choice in my life. I don't know. And even the smallest things like style, I'm like, I don't know what I like to wear.
Right. I think
I'm
that's,
like,
yep.
without trying to fit everything that I'm wearing to garments, I'm like, what's my style? Do I feel okay in a bikini?
Yeah.
How do I feel about coffee? Do I even like coffee, or am I just drinking it because I'm ex-Mormon? Like, so
Yeah.
you just like question yourself about everything.
Yes. Yep. You bring up good points too, I think, because I do think there's almost an ex-Mormon identity plug that could be viewed as prescriptive on the other side, that we don't want to default now to another, condition setting. So I'm glad you said that about kind of that coffee part of like, wait, am I doing it for because I enjoy it? Or,
Right.
and I think that's part of that deconstruction, reconstruction is now you're aware that actually there's conditioning wherever we go, we get positive reinforcement, right?
Yep.
So anyway, that's,
Yeah, when you have that fear of, is there still going to be bad repercussions? Like, I was taught for so long that like coffee was bad. So like, maybe it is still bad. Like maybe it really is. I just found myself questioning every move I made.
Yeah.
And even in motherhood, that really stood out to me. Like, am I leaning too hard the other way, where I'm being like an overexposure parent and I'm just like, swearing at home or exposing them to things that I wouldn't have as a Mormon just because I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
But I think that's okay. I think one of the things that I've realized is that part of me feels a little bit of guilt that my kids had to experience me going through this, because I was hurt and upset and felt a lot of pain for a long time, and they saw that. But it was also, I think in the church, sometimes we don't want to see that there is pain. We want to be like, we're all good because we're in the church, we're happy.
That's right. Yeah.
And I value now that my kids are like, they know that sometimes mom's not okay. And there are a lot of, like, she's a human.
Yeah.
And I want my kids to see me as just another member of the family and not just the one that like sacrifices for everybody. And so to be able to be that example for them of like, yeah, I go through hard times. Sometimes you guys have to sacrifice for me if I'm having a hard day, and like, and you get to step up and to support our family in little ways.
Right.
That they feel more responsible and more a part of our family than just being like, mom's going to take care of it.
That's right. Yeah. I love that. I have a quick question about your deconstruction process, and let's maybe from the lens of like, let's take a psychological, maybe more emotional lens on this as opposed to like a more cognitive or rational one. But it feels like Mormonism gave you a way to kind of plug up the loss of your sister, that, I'm going to just say in parentheses, like worked for a time. But oftentimes what we see, or what we can see, is when someone deconstructs the Mormonism, that plug it's removed. And so now you're back to oftentimes revisiting, especially as you reconstruct your life and what how you're going to feel about things. But loss can come up again.
Yeah.
And did that happen for you with your sister? And how you processed it at the time, because you may not now believe necessarily. I don't know what you believe, but some of those things that were scripted to you, you may no longer believe. So you lose that sense of comfort and you're kind of on your own again, trying to process, how to feel about it. So can you describe a little if you've had that and how it's been?
Yeah. I felt that was one of the first things that came up when I started to say, is any of this real or true? And what does that mean for all of the loved ones that I've lost? And I do think I newly grieved those feelings of for the first time having the idea, I don't think I am ever going to see her again. And what does that mean now? But what I do love about it, that I think, honestly, now I probably feel more peace than I did as a member with losing a loved one, that memories are so important, and the connection that we have with the people that we have right now is like vital. And I used to be so future thinking, so forward thinking, so like, what's this gonna mean for after this life? And now I'm like, if all I get is right here and right now, it makes me more present as a mom. Sometimes I'll have those future thoughts of like, oh, what if my kids die? Having that anxiety. And it puts me right back here. And I'm like, I'll be laying in bed and I'm like, each one of my kids is in their bed and they are asleep and they are happy and they are fed and they are okay. And all those relationships are so much more vital to me now. And I'm like, I'm like, if this is all I got, then it makes me more compassionate. It makes me just happier to be around my family because I do not know what's going to happen after this. And I thought I knew for a long time, and being comfortable with not knowing is a new thing for me.
Yeah.
And it can be hard sometimes because there's still fear. What is going to happen? What's after this life? But the emphasis of now is something that I had never really experienced within the church, because it was always so forward thinking, always thinking celestial, thinking eternal, waiting for that reward, that now I'm like, if it's just here and it's just now, I'm present.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so you have total, I'm just saying you do not have to answer this, but if you want to speak to this, recently I've listened to Andrew Garfield and his thoughts on grief. He lost his mother, and I think he has just so many beautiful insights about loss, what it means to lose someone, and the connection of grief to love, and how oftentimes they're so interconnected, and the way that we touch the gift of love is, after you've lost someone, is in the remembering, right? Mm-hmm. So do you want to say a couple things that you remember? Is it Molly?
Molly.
About Molly, you're saying memories.
Yeah.
Are there certain things that, live in you or that you like to remember?
Yeah, it's going to be hard for me. Like I said, she was 6 and I was 8, so we were really close, and we shared a room. And we had a trundle bed. So we had like my twin bed and a bed that we would pull out from underneath and pop up to sleep. And we had a little tape player that we would listen to little nursery rhymes and tapes every night. And we would just like giggle, just had the funnest time just giggling with each other and laughing. And she was such a funny kid with like a little raspy voice, and she always walked on her tippy toes. And I remember my mom like trying to heal the little cuts that were on her feet, because she was always up on her toes. And some of the last memories that I have are picking her up from kindergarten and walking home with her, and she was just like the purest form of a little sister. Like that sibling that you get, that you just like laugh and play together. And having that be all that it is like, she just gets to live in my head as this teeny 6-year-old with like itchy eczema skin and a raspy voice and blonde hair, and just like, she is perpetually that for me. And I think more than anything, remembering her makes me value my children. I have a 6-year-old, and like, seeing his behavior and the things that he finds funny is a memory of her that I get to play with my 6-year-old, and I get to see him grow. And I remember a very specific moment with my daughter when she turned 7, that I was like, oh, she passed it. Like, almost like that was like a hurdle to get past 6. And it also makes me feel a lot of peace and gratitude for my parents and the hell that they must have gone through to lose a child, and the grief and pain that comes from that.
Yeah.
Because a sibling is one thing, but then when I see my kids and I'm like, 6 is so young, but as a parent, 6 is huge. That's a long time to really know and love a child, and to have that be it and have them leave makes me feel like so much sympathy and love for my parents and what they have gone through and what they want. And I'm like, yeah, they want her again, and they want to see her again. And I'm not somebody that's going to try to take that from them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that.
So just really as a quick follow-up, that's one of the primary, some would say positive, some would say negative roles of religion, is it plugs that existential hole of like, what about our loved ones when they die? You just said you would never want to take that resolution from your parents. Did you value that resolution? And if so, did you have to grieve it? Or do you just think because it happened to you when you were so young, you didn't want or need that resolution as much as your parents might still want or need it? How have you needed to grieve that? Or do you just think it happened so young, it hasn't really been as much of a hole for you as it might have been for your parents?
Yeah, I think it just weighs so much heavier on a parent, and seeing that now, being a parent. And I think sometimes life is just what we make up, and it's all just kind of made up, and we're just, society and all these structures and religion is all just made up sometimes. And if it makes them happy and it helps them through their life to have the idea that they're going to see her again, and it truly is what is best for them to be able to cope with that, then that is what it is. And I think there are so many members of the church, I think like my parents, like my in-laws, that are, the church makes them better. The church is the way in which they help society and the world and their community. And even though it didn't work for me, and it was not the way that I can help my community, and I was able to let that go, I think for them to deconstruct would be devastating. And I sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to pull everybody out of the church, and I get a little jaded about it. And then I see them individually, and I'm like, it's okay. It's okay for people to believe it.
As I'm 20 years on the other side of a faith crisis now in 2024, maybe 23 years on the other side of a faith crisis. And I'm thinking about the value proposition of, to a believing Mormon, you can know you're better than everyone, know you're going to become a God someday, know death is ultimately sad because you're going to live with them in exaltation in the future. You know who you are, you know how to behave, you know what your role is. And like that versus like, it's all made up. You don't know anything. There's no resolution for death. When death happens, that's it. We're all food for worms. Like if I compare those two, one is like, from the Mormon perspective, one is amazing and one is a nightmare. How could anyone, like, are you just miserable that you lost all that? Or is it possible that you can be as happy or even happier having lost, from a believing Mormon's perspective, everything, basically? You pretty much lost almost everything in terms of the stories and the framework and the theology and the philosophy and the structure that helps people get through the day, right?
Yeah.
Did you trade up or trade down? Or trade lateral?
Sometimes all of it, right? It's when we moved to Arizona, I realized that I was like, I don't think anyone's happier than we are. Like that was, and I had always lived in Utah. And so seeing that, I was like, oh, there are a lot of people that have wonderful, great lives, and they seem just as happy as me.
Oh, that weren't Mormon.
That aren't members of the church.
Yeah.
So that was like, but I always hesitate now at this point to say like, I'm happier out than I was in, because it depends on the day and it depends on the circumstance of life that I'm in. But what I do think is true is that my life is richer being out. And that's
why? How?
For me, it's richer because I now have the opportunity to do things I never would have been able to do. I wouldn't have gone to law school. I wouldn't have been exposed to how messed up our criminal justice system is, and something that brings me so much passion to want to help people. I wouldn't have been able to do that within the church. It makes life so much more complicated, but it's for me, it's exposure therapy almost, where when you're a member of the church and you're so believing, there are things that you have to shut your brain off to. And the way that you view people, at least I did, was their life may be good, but it'll be better in the church. Or their life is messy right now, but if they just went to church, it would get better. And it was just that box. And now I'm like, I just get to see people the way that they are and learn from people and be open to the idea that I don't know what's going to be best for my neighbor next to me. And they may be able to choose for themselves what is the best life. And it's not always going to be being a member of the church. And so for me, being able to choose that for myself and having the ability to choose life and to really trust myself and be able to make choices without the justification is what makes it rich. That nobody's telling me what to do, that I get to choose. And that sounds, at first, that makes me hesitate. Mormon Fran is like, that's called selfishness, right? She doesn't like that. But it's not without thought for my family. It's not without thought for my kids and thought for other people. It's just, it is what's best for me. And that can exist in a world where I'm not alone. It can exist in a world where I have family and friends who love me and care about me, and I love and care about them, but I'm also doing what's best for me and honoring what I need and what I want.
Yeah. I mean, can I just say, when you say that, John, the idea of kind of the happiness, are you more happy in and out and selling a plan or selling realities kind of, and who would go with? And I think something that really, I've deconstructed that life, the point of life is this outside the church, this plan of happiness still? Like, what if happiness isn't the point? What if actually it's, feeling more aligned with how life really is for how it actually shows up and works? Or this idea that actually you're here to experience all the things. And maybe we're just trying to like align with what that feels like and take care of ourselves when it's really brutal, and having more confidence or in our skill set and how we do that, right? Or connecting. Yeah. I'm just thinking like that framework of happiness, it can be so detrimental, because then you're always focused on, am I happy? Yeah. Which, who is, right? Who actually like lives that way, where I just think happiness is so fleeting, and there are things that are more important than happiness to me in life anyway. And then when you were talking, what came up for me was the Noah Kahn. We've been talking about Noah Kahn a little bit outside the interview, having gone to a Noah Kahn concert recently. And one thing that we always hits John and I in the concert is the song Growing Sideways, the part of the song that says, what is it, that I may never have met me?
Yeah, right? I'm terrified that I may never have met me.
That, like, how about that?
Yeah.
That's what the other side holds, is that, we actually got to meet ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's the thing that comes to my mind. Is I was talking to a friend recently, and he was talking about the choice to have children. And he was saying, he's like, my goal in life is to just diminish pain and suffering as much as I can. So for me, he says, that means not having kids and maybe fostering or adopting, because bringing someone into the world is going to inevitably cause pain in some way. And so my way is to help the people around me. And I honestly think that's where myself and members of the church find so much common ground, is very Christ-like, to want to eliminate pain and suffering. And if that's my goal, we may be doing that in very different ways than members of the church. But I think on a community, individual level, members of the church are attempting to do that through Christ-like love and service. And I'm doing it in a different way. And especially going through law school has been really hard for me, because it's selfish. Going through school and grades, it's all hypotheticals, and it's research, and it's you, and your grades. But you have to be reminded of the end goal, that sometimes in order to really help your community and to be more compassionate and to serve more, you have to take that time to develop who you are.
Yeah. To gain skills, to learn a language that in the future you're going to apply in your hopes of being a public defender, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, it's such an interesting paradox that Mormons believe they're better and happier than everyone else, and yet there are such high levels of depression and even suicidality, and certainly super high levels of anxiety within Mormonism, and yet somehow those things coexist. So many Mormons are miserable, and they think they're happier and better than everyone else. Now, there are also Mormons who feel happy and fulfilled, so we're not saying it's all misery and sadness, but specifically Mormon women, again in Utah, have super high levels, higher than average, of prescription drug use, of prescription drug abuse, and of depression.
Yep.
But they all think they're better and happier than everyone else. How the church has made this a reality for Mormons, again, and that everybody else is inferior and miserable. It's like, you got to hand it to them. That's a pretty impressive feat. It's dark, but impressive.
Yeah. Well, I think them feeling like, oh yeah, we are better and happier is one of the main reasons that you feel so sad, because you cannot, you can't go to church and fully like be vulnerable and admit to how sad you are if you're fully living the gospel, because you're not supposed to be sad.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that was, Brian and I made one more attempt to go back to church in Arizona because we were moving to Utah County. And I was like, are we going to need to go back to church? Is that something that we need to do? So we went to church, and sacrament meeting was fine because I didn't really listen, and I got to have this quiet time with my kids and, try to find time to like just count the freckles on their hands and get them to be quiet. And it was really meaningful. Then I went to Relief Society, and we talked about depression and the spirit, and they asked me to read a quote. Let's see if I can find it. They asked me to read a quote, and I was like, this is why I can't go back, because I've suffered a lot with depression. They had me read this quote from a conference talk that says, despite our earnest efforts, some of us may still struggle to feel the spirit due to mental health challenges. Depression, anxiety, and other neurological conditions can add complexity to recognizing the Holy Ghost. And I was like, so you're telling me that the Holy Ghost, who should be able to penetrate anyone at any time, is this all-loving, all-knowing being that can bring comfort, Christ's love and comfort, is unable to penetrate my depression? That it's like that.
Yeah.
I was like, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to have to find comfort in another way. I'm going to have to find how to comfort myself. If the Holy Ghost can't even do it, then what's the point of me being here? That it's like the church was not offering me anything anymore that I could not find for myself. And that was it. And I walked out, and I was like, I'm really done.
Mm-hmm.
So that's got to be weird to then move back to like the heart of Mormonism, Provo Orem, back to where you grew up, back to where your parents and in-laws and extended family are. You're now ex-Mormons as physician / aspiring attorney in the most Mormon of all Mormon communities with your family and friends and childhood friends all there. What's that like?
Yeah. It's
What are you thinking?
It's good.
What are you guys thinking?
It's so strange to be back and be different people.
You're almost like new selves.
Yes.
New like little buds of selves, right?
And we saw your husband. He's all tatted up. He's got a sleeve. You both are getting tats, and, right?
Yeah, we're not who we were when we left Utah. So coming back, but one of the nice things about being in Utah and being so exposed and having tattoos and wearing a tank top is that we've sometimes just leaned into being the project and being the problem. And members of the church are not going to be mean to us, that's for sure. And they're going to be kind and reach out and invite us to things. And sometimes it goes a little too far where we get primary teachers showing up with the friend for my kids, and Brian and I just leave it on the counter for a minute, and then
you're just you're marinating in the love bombing, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And
soaking in the love bombs.
Yeah, I've had a time or two that me and my kids have hid from the missionaries that have knocked on our door and just stayed in the basement and waited until they left. But it is also very motivating because there's this element of it that it's like, you guys are going to think that we are not as happy, and we're going to prove to you that we're just fine. And so there's a little bit of a vendetta being around so many members that it's like, we are going to show you that being out of the church is okay. And whatever you think is whatever you think, but that visibly that we're going to do okay, and our kids are okay, and we can live in this environment and figure out how to make it work.
How long have you been in Utah?
We've been in Utah for only
more than 2 years.
When did you move here?
We moved here in May.
In May.
Just 6 months.
Yes.
Yeah.
So very new.
New.
More recent.
Yeah.
I mean, Margie and I did that back in 2004 after we lost our faith. And we stayed in the church, but we moved to Utah. And I will have to say there was a point, especially after my excommunication, where I think our kids felt maybe I'm projecting this onto them, but it's like, really? You go through a big faith crisis, you're ex-Mormons, prominent ex-Mormons, and you're raising us in Utah. Well, why did you do that to us? You know?
And started a podcast.
Yeah.
That was very, I'm not sure you're projecting. I feel that is quite.
I just want to be careful.
That is one of the vibes. I'm not saying it's the vibe, but it is something that they've had to process with us where we're able to say, that is valid.
And yet here you are going on Mormon Stories. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to see this.
Yeah.
And your kids are going to be navigating friendships and relationships in Utah County.
But I think the nice thing about everything that Brian and I have been through is I'm like, we are flexible. And right now our kids are really young and their relationships with grandparents and family members and cousins is really valuable right now. But if they get to a point where it's painful, we pivot.
That's right.
We are flexible and we can change.
Meaning you'll go back to church?
We'll probably move.
Or move. Yeah. It's back to this idea of choices. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That you actually have choices. Yeah.
So if Utah doesn't work out, y'all would move.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah. Just I don't want to ever feel stuck. And we know for sure that like the church isn't for me and we know it's not for Brian. And if it ends up being for our kids and they want to go, that's going to have to be something that we navigate. But we're always going to be open with them. I used to be terrified of the idea that they could possibly go and be a part of the church. And what am I supposed to do with that? But I think a lot of that is just the way that we've chosen to parent our kids, where it's like, you can go to church, and if you want to be there and you want to have the social experience and you want to talk to us about what you learned, like we're going to make sure you know that there are other things that you weren't taught at church so that they can make the choice for themselves, because a lot of this all comes down to choice, right? Where it's like, I think there's a world in which the church would work for my kids, and I hate that, and it would hurt me, but I grew up in a world in which I demonized anyone that was out of the church, and I don't want to have that hard and fast line for my kids that it's like the church is bad. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So your kids right now, I mean, there's always going to be grandma and grandpa, especially if they're living close by, who are eager to not only take your kids to church, but be saying, hey, the baptism age is coming up soon.
Yeah.
Margie, I want to come back to that, but Margie, you wanted to say something.
Oh, no, keep going.
Oh, okay.
No, mine.
Yeah. So how do you handle, people are going to want to know, and you don't have to share things because this is your private life, but like, how does one navigate living in Utah County near grandmas and grandpas, two sets of grandparents who are faithful in the church, and not only sad that y'all aren't attending, but probably even more sad that their grandkids aren't necessarily going to be raised in the church, baptized, and get on the train. How are y'all navigating that? How are you navigating it? How are they navigating it? How are your kids navigating it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us have learned from Dr. Julie Hanks that boundaries are important and making sure that you're having meaningful conversations, and that if you have open communication and conversations, that you can get to a point where you may disagree, but you still respect each other. And we've had to say no to some things. And there are also things like church events and stuff. Like my kids went to the trunk or treat. Like there are things that we'll say yes to. And a lot of those are surrounding that my in-laws just absolutely love my kids and they want to share their life with my kids. And they want people in the ward to see my kids at trunk or treat and to fawn over them and enjoy the grandkids. And that is when they come in such an earnest and intentional and kind way without the motivation of I'm trying to get them baptized, then I'm like, you can take my kids to church. But when it turns into something else, and when I start to see that there's an intention behind it, that they're trying to go behind my back in any way, then that's when conversations have to happen. So you have to be very aware of what people are doing and saying to your kids, and it kind of puts you on high alert. Mm-hmm. But I do think there's a way to have my kids really respect the church and respect Mormonism, and to not feel pressured to be there. But they are still young, so I could eat my words in a few years.
Yeah, I mean, there are people in Utah who are ex-Mormon who worry that their kids will get slowly roped in, whether it's through friendships, romantic relationships, wanting to fit in at school, and that it's a slow, soft path into sort of the flirt to convert, or just like social conversion. I think that's a fear that a lot of ex-Mormons live with in Utah, but there are others that don't. But there is pretty intense, especially in places like Cache Valley or parts of Weber County or all over Utah, where peer pressure is significant, social pressure is significant. You may not, you may lose friends, people may not want to date you. Now it may be changing, I don't know, but those are the things y'all will be experimenting with over the next years and decades.
Yeah. I think it's important to know your children as well, because my oldest daughter she's a redhead and she has the personality of a redhead. Like, she will not let anyone tell her what to do. And if she doesn't want it, she's fine with saying no. So I don't have as much worry with her, because I'm like, she can take care of herself. But then my 6-year-old is more quiet and compliant. And I'm like, oh yeah, if he was in the church, I could easily seeing that, just like the scrupulosity coming out in him, and him feeling like he has to follow all the rules. And so I almost feel more protective of him, because I worry about what that could do to him. But I mean, if you're aware enough as a parent and you're willing to be flexible and pivot, at least at this point, it works. And it's just like when we were in the church, like, it worked for us until it didn't.
Yeah.
And if it works for us here, it works for us here until it doesn't. And then we change.
Part of what's super complicated is there's no one answer. I know ex-Mormons that are happy and thriving and living their best lives. I know ex-Mormons that are blowing up their lives spectacularly, and they probably would have been much better staying in the church. And I know faithful Mormons that are happy and healthy, and they're like in blissful ignorance or mindful, aware bliss. And then I know ex-Mormons that are wanting to die. Sorry, faithful Mormons that are wanting to die. So like, there's no one recipe for all people. That's what's hard is when you leave, you think you want to say, well, then not being in a religion is the answer. Mm-hmm. But there are some people that do better in a religion. Full stop.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. That life is just choose your own adventure. And sometimes that results in people making some pretty terrible mistakes that really have terrible consequences. And sometimes you can navigate it well where you don't have so many consequences. And it's just, but the ability to choose that for yourself is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, yeah. Margie.
If we were going to lean into this reconstruction kind of part, which feels newer, it kind of feels like a newer part of you. Maybe we'll start here and then I have a follow-up question. But what are things that you're proud of? Like things that you have rebuilt that have taken energy, effort, that could be, around marriage, mothering, whatever. Yeah. Beliefs or stories about yourself that you feel like you've rewritten, or what are some touch point things that you have reconstructed recently that you would want to share that you're proud of?
One thing that I really like in the idea of having a career and working is, as a member of the church, I got taught a lot, the voluntariness of the church being a volunteer and giving your time was the most Christ-like way to do it, to volunteer. But I've had this mind shift that sometimes the most valuable way to give your time is to do it in a way in which you get compensated for it, because your skill set can be so niche and so valuable that there would be no way to do it voluntarily because it takes so much time and effort or education. And Brian really taught me that going through medicine, because sometimes you just think that you go into medicine so you can get a really good paycheck at the end of it, but it is a grueling, long training period. And if you're only going in it for the money, it can be really hard, but it's this beautiful balance of having skills, especially as a doctor. Like, he has skills that very few people have. And that is so valuable to his community. And he could not do that voluntarily. He has to be compensated in some way. And so I just really value the way that we exchange goods and services. And there are people that are paid for the thing that they do the best. And that feels like a bigger contribution that I can make to society than I could make being a stay-at-home mom. Because I have discovered that I'm smart and that I really like criminal law, and I can do so much more for the people that need it. And I'm in a extremely privileged situation with Brian where I don't have to worry so much about what my actual income is, but I can just do it and give it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And then maybe on the flip side, have there been really hard things or challenges? What have those been as you have reconstructed?
I think the hardest thing is like individual relationships, or having some people that you thought it wouldn't affect that it really did. Yeah. And that your relationship will never quite be what it was. There's a I think the biggest part of grief from leaving the church has been that there's so many people that I was like, you're almost like, I just still love me. I'm still me. Like, don't abandon me. Don't think I'm something that I'm not. I'm still me. I'm just like changing and doing something different. And that yearning and just having to let people be themselves. And I spent a lot of time, I think, in those first couple of years thinking of all the ways that I could convince someone that I'm okay, or convince someone that like this change is good for me, instead of just being like, they may never accept it and I have to let that go. That's definitely been like the most painful part of all of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because if you were a scrupulous believing Mormon, then you made a lot of people happy being that sort of Nephi character. Yeah. It validated them. It validated their beliefs. It meant they did their job. It made them feel secure in the world. And so not only is it disrupting how they view themselves and you in the world, but all that positive reinforcement that you used to get from them for being the good girl, for being the good Mormon, they don't respect you. I didn't mention this at dinner, but I coined this saying about 20 years ago that an ex-Mormon could win the Nobel Peace Prize and cure cancer and they'd still be a disappointment to their family, believing Mormon family.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And that's a big loss of, again, an extrinsic sense of positive reinforcement about who you are.
Yep.
You have to go intrinsic about your own self-worth and your own self-value, because a lot of people that really looked up to you and respected you now don't look up to you and respect you. It's the opposite. They look down on you and disrespect you for your decisions, I think.
Yeah. Well, especially depending on how faithful of a member you were. Brian and I were very faithful in members. And so it was almost like the first time that we were a disappointment to a lot of people. And that hits hard because, I mean, you just think that it could never be you, that they were like, oh, everyone, they knew me and they loved me. Like, even if it's this, like, they're not going to be disappointed, and they are. And you just have to deal with having people go through a grieving process that you want them to help you grieve this loss of the church, and you want support and love. But because it hurts them so bad that you're gone, they have to take care of themselves and they can't take care of you. And so you really have to take care of yourself. And I mean, I was lucky enough to have a partner who went through it with me, but I mean, individuals in mixed faith marriages really have to take care of themselves because they may feel alone.
And again, you don't just have to deal with losing your faith. You have to deal with now being viewed as a disappointment by the people you love and respect most.
Yeah. But it's like my husband Brian says with all of his sleeve of tattoos, that he always says, your tattoo's never going to be exactly what you want. And it's a practice of acceptance.
Right.
That it's just you have to accept. And especially as an adult, I think you kind of just realize that you're like, not everyone's going to be cool with me.
Right.
Not everyone's going to like me. And the only person that I really have who's going to love me is me. And you have to really love and take care of yourself, because if you have struggles with your own identity or your own self-worth, then you can get to a point where there's literally no one looking out for you.
That's right. Yep, I love that.
So with all the cost, it still feels worth it to you to have gone through all this pain and difficulty with a faith reconstruction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about it all the time, that I'm like, this was really painful. Going through this deconstruction was surprisingly traumatic. But the other side is that I'm here where I am now, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be here in this chair, being able to share my story with and I know there's such a spectrum of people that are listening to Mormon Stories, people that are in that very first stage, people that just love to listen to the new episode that comes out. And every single one of us, it's painful. This deconstruction and leaving the Mormon faith there's pain that goes into it. But I mean, we learn this in the church, that you can't have joy without pain. And you really, once you get to the other side and you give yourself the patience and you allow yourself to grieve, there's a lot of joy that can be had on the other side.
That's right.
Wait, so Mormonism prepared you for ex-Mormonism? Is that what you're saying?
In essence, yeah. There's so many valuable principles that you pull out of Mormonism and you're like, this still applies. And it does, it still applies. I'm like, I don't feel tremendous joy without tremendous pain. And true principles and things that apply to life, whether they are learned from Mormonism or Buddhism or Stoicism, they're just real.
Yeah.
Well, beautiful. Well, what an amazing story. I know you've got that outline. Is there anything else that you really wanted to make sure and cover? Because this has been a really powerful, I know this interview is going to reach a lot of people and impact a lot of people. And I hope someday Brian can come on too, because he was super fun to meet. And I know he's doing great work in Utah County as an OBGYN. But any final words before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just think the last thing, and I mean, I've said this so many times, but I really hope that people that are in the beginning of this are patient with themselves, because I wanted to be over and done with the church and move on and be happy and living my best life in a few months. And it's now like 4 years later, and there are still moments that I hear something or I'm reminded of something and I cry, or I call my husband and I rant. And it is it's just difficult, and but I think more than anything, especially women and especially moms, getting to a point where you trust yourself and you don't need your outside authority or your priesthood leader or your ecclesiastical leader to tell you it's okay is something that it's so empowering to be able to choose who you are, what you do, who you love. Sometimes having that ability to be true to yourself and honor what is best for you is what will really bring you happiness or joy or just a full, rich life.
What a beautiful testimony.
Thank you.
And I guess y'all are looking to find community here. Is that fair to say, here in Utah County / Utah?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The church does community really well, and it's hard to replicate. And so, yeah, we're always trying to replicate that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what a treat.
We're so grateful to have met you, Fran.
Thank you.
Yeah. Fran Grover, thanks so much for coming on Mormon Stories. Yeah,
Thank you
it's
so
been really
much.
great.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Come back and see us. Good luck with finishing law school. You're now a Ute.
Yeah,
So
go
does your
Utes.
husband cheer for BYU or for University of Utah or both?
Oh, he's a Cougar fan through and through.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So the game coming up next weekend, he's going to cheer for the Cougars, who happen to be 8-0. So it's not a great year for the Utes.
No, it's not. Yeah. BYU has the Lord on their side this time. So.
Who are you cheering for? BYU or you don't care?
You know, I don't care.
Okay.
But I do like to I like the event. So I will be eating. I will be
It's about the food, about
I have a BYU sweatshirt and a Utah sweatshirt, and it's just going to depend on which one's clean. But that's what I'll wear. That's what I'll go with.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, good luck with law school.
Thank you.
And come back and give us an update once things update for you.
Okay.
All right.
Will do. Thank you.
And Margie, thanks for being co-host today. It's great to have you. People love you.
I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories. Huge thanks to Julia for all her production help, Gerardo too, and Maven and Brooklyn, our staff here at Mormon Stories. Couldn't do it without them. All my co-hosts, especially Margie. Thanks to our board, and mostly thanks to our donors. We can't do this show without donors. So for those of you who donate regularly, thank you. If you don't donate regularly and you want to see this content continue, you want to pay it forward, we would love you to become monthly donors. So please go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, and become a monthly donor, and we'll keep providing what we provide. Just for those who are curious, we're at this point where we're thinking about ways to stay sustainable, ways to grow our influence, and we're wondering, should we do ads? Should we do commercial sponsorships? Will that annoy the donors? One way to just simplify all that is because I think we have like 1,800 donors in a given year and hundreds of thousands of listeners. So the disparity between donors and listeners is just huge. So we're trying to figure out what to do about that, but you can help us figure that out if you just become supporters. Anyway, regardless, we're glad you tune in. We're grateful. We really appreciate if you'll subscribe to our channels on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc. And if you like this episode, feel free to share it with others. And we always welcome your feedback at mormonstories@gmail.com. Finally, we have a new application process if you want to come on the show. That's how we found out about Fran. So we can only accept a fraction of those who apply, but you can't come on unless you apply. So go to mormonstories.org, click on the apply button if you want to come on. And it may be that we accept you immediately. It may be that we don't accept you ever just because it's not a great fit, or it may be that it takes a little time, but we welcome you to apply if it's something you want to be a part of. All right. Thanks for joining us today. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. Go Cougars and go Utes. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.